She was invisible until the Mafia boss changed her life. The very skinny woman now opens doors once closed. Nobody saw her. Nobody turned their heads when she walked by. Nobody remembered her name, her face, or even the sound of her voice. For 29 years, Elaine Mercer had lived on the margins of the world, a shadow among shadows, a whisper lost in the noise of a city that never stopped screaming. She was so thin that people sometimes looked right through her, as if she were made of glass, as if the bones pressing against her skin were not enough to prove she existed. She was invisible until the Mafia boss changed her life. The very skinny woman now opens doors once closed. And this is not a fairy tale. This is the story of how one woman went from being nothing to becoming something that nobody, not even the most powerful men in Brooklyn, could ever ignore again. The morning of March 7th started like every other morning in Elaine Mercer's life. The alarm on her cracked. Phone buzzed at 4:45, and she reached for it with fingers so thin they looked like they might snap. The room she rented was barely bigger than a closet, tucked above a laundromat on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. The ceiling had a brown stain, shaped like a continent she could never name, and the radiator had stopped working sometime in January. She had learned to sleep in 2 sweaters and a coat, curled up so tight she could feel her own ribs pressing against her knees. Elaine stood up and looked at herself in the cracked mirror nailed to the back of the door. The woman staring back at her was gaunt, hollow cheeks, eyes too big for her face, collarbones that jutted out like the frame of an old ship. She weighed 91 pounds, and she knew it because the free clinic on Atlantic Avenue had weighed her last Tuesday, and the nurse had looked at her with that expression, that mixture of pity and discomfort that people always wore when they saw someone whose body was failing, them in plain sight. It was not that Elaine chose to be this thin. She had a condition. Doctors had given it names over the years: malabsorption, chronic gastritis, stress-induced appetite suppression. But the truth was simpler and more brutal than any diagnosis. Elaine had spent most of her life unable to keep food down. Stress made it worse. Poverty made it worse. Loneliness made it worse. And Elaine had all 3 in abundance. She pulled on her work uniform, a grey polo shirt with the logo of a commercial cleaning company embroidered on the chest, and tucked it into pants that were 2 sizes too big, cinched at the waist with a belt she had punched extra holes into with a kitchen knife. She grabbed her bag, which contained a water bottle, a packet of saltine crackers and a bus pass, and she stepped out into the cold Brooklyn morning. The sky was the color of dirty concrete. The streets were still mostly empty, save for a few delivery trucks and a man sleeping under a pile of cardboard near the subway entrance. Elaine walked quickly, her thin frame cutting through the wind like a blade. She was used to the cold. She was used to the emptiness. What she was not used to, what she had never gotten used to, was the way people looked at her when they finally did notice her, the way their eyes would widen slightly, the way they would glance away, the way some of them would whisper to each other as if she were a cautionary tale walking past them on the sidewalk. She caught the B-41 bus and rode it standing, because she had learned long ago that sitting down sometimes meant someone would sit next to her and then shift uncomfortably, pressing themselves against the window to avoid touching her, as if her thinness were something contagious. Standing was easier. Standing meant she could hold the pole and stare out the window and pretend she was somewhere else entirely. Her job that morning was at a commercial office building in downtown Brooklyn, one of those glass towers that had sprung up in the last decade, filled with tech startups and marketing agencies and people who drank oat milk lattes and wore sneakers that cost more than Elaine's monthly rent. She was part of the overnight cleaning crew, which meant she arrived before the employees and left before they could see her. She was, quite literally, designed to be unseen. Elaine mopped floors. She emptied trash cans filled with takeout containers and coffee cups. She wiped down desks and sanitized bathrooms and vacuumed carpets that were already clean. She did this for 6 hours, 5 days a week, for $11.75 an hour. After taxes and the deductions her employer took for uniform maintenance and equipment fees, she brought home roughly $1,400 a month. Her rent was $900, her phone bill was $40, her Metro card was $66. That left her with less than $400 a month for everything else: food, medicine, occasional desperate trip to the laundromat when she could not wash her clothes in the sink anymore. She had no savings. She had no family. Her mother had died when Elaine was 19. A heart attack in the kitchen of their apartment in East New York, sudden and final, like a door slamming shut. Her father had left before she was old enough to remember his face. She had a brother somewhere in Philadelphia, but they had not spoken in 7 years, not since he told her that she needed to get it together. And she told him that he had no idea what it meant to try to get anything together when your body was working against you every single day. So Elaine was alone. And alone in New York City was a special kind of alone, the kind where you could be surrounded by 8 million people and still feel like the last person on earth. That morning, as she finished her shift and walked out of the office building into the brightening daylight, something happened that would change everything. It was small. It was almost nothing. But in the life of someone like Elaine Mercer, almost nothing could become everything. She was walking past a restaurant on Court Street, an Italian place with a dark green awning and gold lettering that read Vecchio's, when she saw a wallet on the sidewalk. It was thick, made of black leather, and it was sitting right there on the concrete, half hidden under the edge of a planter box. Elaine stopped. She looked around. The street was mostly empty. A few people walked on the other side, heads down, earbuds in, oblivious. She picked it up. Inside there was cash, a lot of cash. Elaine's hands trembled as she flipped through the bills, 20s, 50s, hundreds. She did not count it all, but she could tell there was at least $2,000, maybe more. There were also several credit cards, a New York driver's license, and a business card. The name on the license read Vincent Moretti. The face in the photo was that of a man in his early 60s with silver hair combed back, dark eyes, and a jawline that suggested he had been very handsome once and still carried the authority of that handsomeness like a weapon. The business card was simple, cream-colored, heavy stock, with embossed black lettering. It read Vincent Moretti, President Moretti Holdings Group. There was a phone number and an address in Red Hook. Elaine stood there on the sidewalk, holding the wallet, and for a moment, just a moment, she let herself imagine what $2,000 could do. She could pay rent for 2 months. She could buy real food, not just crackers and canned soup, but actual meals. She could go to the doctor without worrying about the copay. She could buy a coat that actually fit her. She could, for the first time in as long as she could remember, breathe. But then she looked at the driver's license again. She looked at Vincent Moretti's face, and she thought about the kind of person she was, and the kind of person she wanted to be, and she knew, with the same certainty that she knew the sun would rise, and her stomach would hurt and no one would remember her name, that she was going to return the wallet. It was not a heroic decision. It was not even a conscious one, really. It was just who Elaine was. She had been beaten down by life in almost every way a person could be beaten down, but she had never lost the one thing that no amount of poverty or loneliness or hunger could take from her: her sense of right and wrong. And taking someone else's money, no matter how desperately she needed it, was wrong. She slipped the wallet into her bag and started walking toward the address on the business card. Red Hook was a 20-minute walk from Court Street, and Elaine made it in 15 because the wind was at her back, and because she wanted to get this over with before she changed her mind. The neighborhood had changed a lot in the last few years. New condos going up next to old warehouses, artisanal ice cream shops sitting across from auto body repair places. But there were still pockets of the old Red Hook, the one that people used to warn you about, the one where certain families had run certain businesses for generations, and where you learned very quickly not to ask questions about what happened behind closed doors. The address on the business card led to a building that looked like it might have been a warehouse once. 3 stories of red brick with tall windows and a heavy metal door painted black. There was no sign, no nameplate, nothing to indicate what was inside. Just the door and the brick and a security camera mounted above the entrance, its lens pointed directly at whoever approached. Elaine hesitated. Something about the building made her uneasy. It was too quiet, too still, too much like a place that did not want to be found. But she had come this far, and she was holding a stranger's wallet, and so she stepped up to the door and knocked. Nothing happened. For a long moment, Then she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and the door opened. The man who appeared was enormous. Not fat, but built like a professional athlete, with a shaved head and shoulders so wide he had to turn slightly to fit through the doorframe. He looked down at Elaine with an expression that was not quite hostile, but was very far from friendly. "Yeah?" he said. Elaine held up the wallet. "I found this," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. "On Court Street, near Vecchio's. I think it belongs to someone named Vincent Moretti. This was the address on his card." The man stared at her. Then he stared at the wallet. Then he stared at her again, and something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly, but something adjacent to surprise. "Wait here," he said, and he closed the door. Elaine stood on the sidewalk, shivering, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake. The wind picked up, and she pulled her coat tighter around her, which did almost nothing because the coat was old and thin and offered about as much warmth as a paper towel. She considered leaving, just setting the wallet on the ground and walking away, but before she could decide, the door opened again. This time, a different man appeared. He was older, mid-60s maybe, with silver hair combed back from his forehead, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and a face that was both refined and weathered, like an expensive piece of furniture that had been through a storm. He was wearing a dark suit with no tie, and his shoes were polished to a mirror finish. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. It was the man from the driver's license, Vincent Moretti. He looked at Elaine, and Elaine looked at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Vincent glanced at the wallet in her hand and said, in a voice that was low and gravelly and surprisingly gentle, "You found my wallet?" "Yes, sir," Elaine said, "on Court Street. I thought you might need it back." Vincent took the wallet from her, opened it, and looked inside. He thumbed through the cash, checked the cards, and then closed it again. His eyes returned to Elaine, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time, the sensation of being truly seen, not glanced at, not looked through, not pitied from a distance. Seen. "You did not take anything," he said. It was not a question. "No, sir. There is over $3,000 in this wallet. I know. And you brought it back." Elaine nodded. She did not know what else to say. She was not looking for a reward or a thank you or anything at all, really. She just wanted to do the right thing and then go home and lie down, because her shift had been long and her legs were aching, and her stomach was doing that thing it always did when she went too long without eating, which was most of the time. Vincent Moretti studied her for what felt like a full minute. He took in her gaunt face, her bony wrists, her oversized coat, her worn-out shoes. He took in the dark circles under her eyes and the way she stood, slightly hunched, as if she were trying to make herself even smaller than she already was. And something happened in his expression that Elaine could not quite read, a flicker of something that might have been recognition or memory, or simply the awareness that the woman standing in front of him was carrying a weight far heavier than her frail body should have been able to bear. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elaine. Elaine Mercer." "Elaine," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Come inside. It is cold out here, and you look like you could use something warm to drink." Elaine hesitated. Every instinct she had developed over 29 years of surviving in this city told her not to walk into a strange building with a strange man, no matter how polite he seemed. But there was something in Vincent. Moretti's voice, not charm exactly, but something deeper, something that sounded almost like respect, that made her feel, against all reason, that she was safe. "Okay," she said, and she stepped through the door. The inside of the building was nothing like the outside. Where the exterior was industrial and forbidding, the interior was warm and elegant. Dark wood paneling, thick rugs, leather furniture, the smell of coffee and old books. It looked like a private club, the kind of place where important decisions were made over whiskey and handshakes. There were several men in the room, all of them well-dressed, all of them turning to look at Elaine with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. Vincent led her to a table in the corner, pulled out a chair for her and gestured for her to sit. Then he called out to someone in the back, and a moment later, a young man appeared with a cup of coffee, a plate of pastries, and a glass of water. "Eat," Vincent said. "Please." Elaine looked at the food. Her stomach clenched, not from nausea this time, but from something closer to grief. She could not remember the last time someone had offered her food with such simple kindness, without pity, without conditions, without that look that said, "You poor thing." She picked up a pastry, a small almond biscotti, and took a bite, and it was so good that she had to close her eyes for a moment to keep herself from crying. Vincent sat across from her and watched her eat with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. When she had finished the biscotti and started on a second one, he spoke. "Tell me about yourself, Elaine Mercer." And so she did. She did not know why. She never talked about herself, never volunteered her story to anyone, never saw the point in sharing her pain with people who could not possibly understand it. But there was something about Vincent Moretti, something about the way he listened, that made her feel like her words mattered. Like she mattered. She told him about her mother dying, about her father leaving, about her brother in Philadelphia who had given up on her. She told him about her condition, about the doctors who could not fix her, about the weight she could not gain no matter how hard she tried. She told him about the cleaning job, about the tiny room above the laundromat, about the way people looked at her, or did not look at her, and about the crushing, suffocating loneliness of being a person the world had decided was not worth noticing. She talked for almost 20 minutes, and the entire time Vincent Moretti did not interrupt, did not offer advice, did not try to fix anything. He just listened. And when she was done, when she had said everything she had been carrying inside her for years, he nodded slowly and said something that Elaine would remember for the rest of her life. "You know what I see when I look at you, Elaine," he said. "I see someone who found $3,000 on the street and brought it back. I see someone who has every reason to take what she can and trust nobody, but who chose to be honest anyway. I see someone who the world has overlooked, but who has not let the world change who she is. That is rare. That is more valuable than anything in that wallet." Elaine did not know what to say. She felt her eyes sting, and she looked down at her hands, at her thin fingers wrapped around the coffee cup, and she tried very hard not to cry. Vincent leaned forward. "I want to help you," he said. "Not because I feel sorry for you, I do not do pity, but because I believe that people who do the right thing when it costs them something deserve to be rewarded, and because I have the means to help, and it would be wrong of me not to." Elaine looked up at him. "I was not looking for a reward," she said. "I know," Vincent said. "That is exactly why you deserve one. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because stories like this one, about real people who rise from nothing against all odds, are uploaded here every single week. If you do not want to miss what happens next, hit that subscribe button right now." Over the next few days, Elaine Mercer could not stop thinking about Vincent Moretti. She went back to her routine, the early morning alarm, the bus ride, the mopping and wiping and emptying of trash cans, but something had shifted inside her. It was not hope, exactly. Elaine had learned long ago not to trust hope, because hope was just another word for disappointment that had not happened yet. But it was something, a crack in the wall she had built around herself, a sliver of light in a room that had been dark for so long she had forgotten what light looked like. She expected never to hear from Vincent again. Rich people said kind things all the time. They offered help the way they offered handshakes, reflexively, without thinking, and with no intention of following through. Elaine had met enough of them during her years of cleaning their offices to know how it worked. They would see her mopping a floor at 6 in the morning and say something like, "You work so hard, that is really admirable," and then step over her mop bucket without a second glance. Words were cheap, actions were expensive, and Elaine had learned to price things accurately. So when her phone rang 3 days later, a Tuesday afternoon, while she was sitting on her bed eating crackers and watching a pigeon on the fire escape, and the voice on the other end said, "Elaine, this is Vincent Moretti. I would like to meet with you again." She was so surprised that she nearly dropped the phone. "Mr. Moretti," she said, and her voice cracked. "Please," he said. "Call me Vincent. Are you free tomorrow morning? I have a proposition for you, and I would like to discuss it in person." The word proposition made her nervous. In Elaine's experience, propositions from powerful men rarely ended well for women like her. But there had been nothing predatory in Vincent's behavior. No suggestive looks, no lingering touches, no compliments about her appearance. He had treated her with a straightforwardness that she found both unsettling and refreshing. "I have a shift in the morning," she said, "but I am off by 10. 10:30 then, same place. I will have someone meet you at the door." And so, the next morning, after 6 hours of scrubbing toilets and vacuuming cubicles, Elaine Mercer found herself once again standing in front of the red brick building in Red Hook. The same enormous man opened the door. His name, she would learn, was Tony, and led her inside, where Vincent Moretti was sitting at the same table, drinking espresso and reading a newspaper. He stood when he saw her, which was a gesture so old-fashioned and unexpected that Elaine did not know how to respond. He pulled out her chair, just as he had before, and the same young man appeared with coffee and pastries. This time, Elaine did not hesitate to eat. Her stomach was calmer today, and the biscotti were too good to refuse. "Thank you for coming," Vincent said, settling into his chair across from her. "I will be direct with you, Elaine, because I think you are the kind of person who appreciates directness." "I am," she said. "Good." He folded his newspaper and set it aside. "I have a business. Several businesses, actually. Some of them are public. Some of them are not. I am not going to insult your intelligence by pretending that I am a simple businessman. I think you probably figured out from the moment you walked through that door that I am a man of certain influence." Elaine nodded. She was not naive. The building, the men, the security camera, the deference with which everyone treated Vincent, it all pointed to a reality that she understood without needing it spelled out. Vincent Moretti was not just wealthy. He was connected. He was powerful in ways that did not show up on tax returns or LinkedIn profiles. "What I want to propose," Vincent continued, "is a job, a real job, not cleaning, not scrubbing floors at 4 in the morning, something that uses your actual abilities." Elaine almost laughed. "Mr. Moretti, Vincent, with all due respect, I do not have any abilities. I did not finish college. I have been cleaning offices for 8 years. I do not know how to do anything else." Vincent shook his head. "That is not true. You have the most important ability there is. You are honest, genuinely, fundamentally honest. Do you know how rare that is? I have been in business for 40 years, and I can count on one hand the number of truly honest people I have met. Most people will steal from you the moment the opportunity presents itself. They will smile to your face and stab you in the back the second it benefits them. But you found $3,000 and brought it back to a stranger, not because you hoped for a reward, not because you were afraid of getting caught, but because it was the right thing to do." He leaned forward. "I need someone like that, someone I can trust completely, someone who will not lie to me, will not steal from me, will not play games. I need an assistant. Someone to help me manage my legitimate business affairs, the real estate, the restaurants, the import company. Someone to organize my schedule, handle correspondence, coordinate meetings. It is an office job. Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. The salary is $75,000 a year, plus health insurance plus a car allowance." Elaine stared at him. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, and her hands were shaking, and she had to put her coffee cup down because she was afraid she would spill it. $75,000. She currently made roughly $16,000. The number was so far beyond anything she had ever imagined for herself that it sounded like a different language. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because my mother was like you." He paused, and Elaine saw something move across his face. Not pain exactly, but the shadow of pain, the kind that comes from a wound that has healed but left a scar. "My mother came to this country from Sicily in 1963, he said. She was 19 years old. She did not speak English. She had no money, no education, no connections. She worked in a garment factory in the Lower East Side, sewing buttons onto coats for 12 hours a day. She was small, tiny really, and she was always thin, because she gave most of her food to me and my brother. She was the most honest, most decent person I have ever known, and the world treated her like she was nothing, like she was invisible. He looked at Elaine with those dark, sharp eyes, and she felt once again that sensation of being seen, truly, completely seen. She died when I was 22, he said, and I made a promise to myself that day that if I ever had the power to help someone like her, someone the world had overlooked, someone who deserved better, I would do it. Not out of pity, out of respect, out of the belief that a person's worth is not determined by their bank account or their waistline or the neighborhood they live in. It is determined by who they are when no one is watching. Elaine's eyes were full of tears now, and she did not try to hide them. She let them fall, silently, down her hollow cheeks, and she did not wipe them away, because for the first time in a long time, she did not feel ashamed of showing someone how she felt. "There are conditions," Vincent said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "First, you see a doctor, a good one. I have a friend at NYU Langone, a specialist in gastrointestinal disorders, and I want you to see him. Whatever treatment you need, I will cover it. Second, you move out of that room above the laundromat. I own an apartment building in Carroll Gardens. There is a one-bedroom unit available on the 3rd floor. You will live there and you will pay rent, but it will be a rent you can afford. I am not giving you charity. I am giving you a chance." "And the third condition?" Elaine asked, because she could tell there was a third. Vincent smiled. It was a small smile, barely a movement of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. "The third condition," he said, "is that you never, ever lose that honesty. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, no matter what happens in the course. They're working for me. You stay who you are, can you do that?" Elaine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She took a breath, and then she said the word that would change the course of her life. "Yes." The next 2 weeks were a blur of change, so rapid and so disorienting that Elaine sometimes felt like she had stepped into someone else's life by accident. She gave notice at the cleaning company. Her supervisor, a tired woman named Dolores, looked at her with genuine surprise and said, "Good. For you, honey. You deserved better than this place." She packed up her few possessions from the room above the laundromat. It took less than an hour, because everything she owned fit into 2 garbage bags and a backpack, and moved into the apartment in Carroll Gardens. The apartment was a revelation. It was small by New York standards, a living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, but to Elaine, it felt like a palace. The floors were hardwood, the windows were clean. The kitchen had a stove that worked, and a refrigerator that hummed quietly, and shelves that she could fill with actual food. The bedroom had a bed, a real bed, with a mattress and clean sheets and pillows, and when Elaine lay down on it for the first time, she stared at the ceiling and cried for 20 minutes, not because she was sad, but because she had forgotten what it felt like to be comfortable. She saw the doctor at NYU Langone, Dr. Amrita Patel, a gastroenterologist with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, and after a battery of tests, Dr. Patel told her that her condition was treatable. Not curable, perhaps, but manageable. With the right medication, the right diet, and the right support, Elaine could gain weight, could eat without pain, could give her body the fuel it desperately needed. "You have been running on empty for years," Dr. Patel said. "Your body has been in survival mode. We are going to change that." And then there was the job itself. Elaine arrived at the Red Hook building, on her first day of work wearing a new outfit, a simple black blouse and grey slacks that she had bought at a second-hand store on Atlantic Avenue, the nicest clothes she had owned in years. Tony, the enormous man at the door, nodded at her with something that almost resembled friendliness. Inside, she was shown to a small office on the 2nd floor, her office, with a desk and a computer and a phone and her name on a plaque outside the door. Her name, Elaine Mercer, on a plaque. She had to touch it to make sure it was real. Her duties were exactly as Vincent had described. She managed his calendar, organized his files, answered his correspondence, and coordinated meetings with his various business partners, lawyers, accountants, real estate developers, restaurant suppliers. Everything she dealt with was legitimate. The real estate portfolio alone was substantial. Vincent owned commercial properties throughout Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan, and the import company brought in specialty Italian foods that supplied some of the best restaurants in the city. It was real work, meaningful work, and Elaine threw herself into it with an intensity that surprised even her. She was good at it. That was the shock. After years of being told, by the world, by circumstance, by her own defeated internal voice, that she was not capable of anything more than mopping floors, she discovered that she had a mind that was sharp and organized and hungry for challenge. She learned the filing systems in 2 days. She memorized Vincent's contacts in a week. She started anticipating his needs before he voiced them, having the right document ready before he asked, scheduling meetings at times she knew he preferred, flagging potential problems before they became actual problems. Vincent noticed. Of course he did. He was a man who noticed everything. "You have a gift," he told her one afternoon, standing in the doorway of her office. "You see the details. Most people miss the details." "I have spent my whole life being a detail that people missed," Elaine said, and the words came out before she could stop them. She looked up at Vincent, startled by her own boldness, but he just laughed, a rare sound, low and warm, and shook his head. "Not anymore," he said, but there was another side to the Red Hook building, and Elaine was not naive enough to ignore it. She saw the men who came and went at odd hours, men with hard eyes and expensive suits, and the kind of tension in their shoulders that suggested they were always ready for something. She heard snippets of conversations in hallways, voices dropping to whispers when she passed by. She noticed the way certain rooms were always locked, certain phone calls always taken in private, certain visitors always escorted directly to Vincent's office, without passing through the common areas. She understood. She had grown up in Brooklyn. She knew what the Moretti name meant, even if she had never been close enough to that world to know the details. Vincent Moretti was not just a businessman. He was the head of a family, and not just a family in the biological sense. But Vincent had been true to his word. Everything that crossed Elaine's desk was legitimate. Every document, every transaction, every meeting she scheduled was clean. He had built a wall between his public life and his private one, and he had placed Elaine firmly on the public side. She appreciated that. She respected it. And she kept her promise. She did not ask questions. She did not snoop. She did not let her curiosity pull her across a line that she understood was there for both their protection. Still, the knowledge sat in the back of her mind, like a stone in a shoe. She was working for a man whose hands were not entirely clean, and no amount of biscotti and kindness could change that fundamental fact. But then she would think about where she had been 3 weeks ago, freezing in a closet-sized room, scrubbing toilets for $11 an hour, invisible to the entire world. And she would think about the doctor who was treating her condition, and the apartment with the clean sheets and the plaque with her name on it. And she would tell herself that life was complicated, and that sometimes the people who helped you were not perfect, and that maybe, just maybe, that was okay. As the weeks turned into a month, and then 2 months, Elaine began to change. It was subtle at first, a little more color in her cheeks, a little less hollowness in her eyes. Dr. Patel's treatment was working. She was eating regularly for the first time in years, small, carefully planned meals that her body could tolerate. She gained 4 pounds in the first month, and then another 3 in the second. And while she was still very thin, she no longer looked like she was disappearing. She looked like someone who was, slowly and stubbornly, coming back to life. Her confidence grew too. She spoke up more in meetings. She offered suggestions that Vincent actually implemented. She started learning about real estate, not just the administrative side, but the strategic side, the market analysis, the property valuation, the art of seeing potential in a building that others had written off. "You should take some courses," Vincent told her. "There is a program at NYU, Real Estate Finance and Development. I know people on the admissions committee." "I did not finish college," Elaine reminded him. So finish it. Then go to you. It was such a simple statement, delivered with such casual certainty, that Elaine almost believed it was possible. Almost. The voice in her head, the one that had been whispering, "You are not enough," for 29 years, was quieter now, but it had not disappeared entirely. It was still there, crouched in the corner of her mind, waiting for her to fail so it could say, "I told you so." But Elaine was learning something important, something that no doctor or therapist or self-help book had ever taught her. The voice was a liar. It had always been a liar, and she was done listening to it. 3 months into her new life, the first real test arrived. It came in the form of a man named Dominic Ferrara. Dominic was Vincent's nephew, the son of his sister, and he served as a kind of unofficial lieutenant in the family's affairs. He was in his late 30s, tall, good-looking, in a sharp, predatory way, with slicked-back hair and suits that were always a little too tight, as if he wanted the world to know exactly how much he had spent on them. He had the smile of a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room, and the eyes of a man who usually was not. Dominic did not like Elaine. He did not like her from the moment he first saw her, sitting at her desk in her small office with her name on the plaque, doing the work that he felt should have been done by someone from the family, or at least someone who understood the family's world. He did not say this directly. He was too clever for that, at least in front of Vincent. But he made his feelings known in 100 small ways. He would walk past her office without acknowledging her. He would leave documents on her desk without explanation, expecting her to figure out what to do with them. He would make comments, casual, offhand, deniable, about how certain jobs required a certain background and how Uncle Vinny always had a soft spot for strays. Elaine ignored it. She had spent her entire life being dismissed and belittled, and she had developed a thick skin long before she arrived at the Red Hook building. Dominic Ferrara was not the first person to treat her like she did not belong, and he would not be the last. She did her work, she kept her head down, and she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. But then Dominic did something that Elaine could not ignore. It was a Friday afternoon, and Elaine was organizing the files for a real estate deal that Vincent had been working on for months, the acquisition of a warehouse in Gowanus that was going to be converted into mixed-use retail and residential space. It was a big deal, worth several $1 million, and Vincent had put a lot of care into the negotiations. Elaine had been managing the paperwork, coordinating with the lawyers and the city planning office, and she had every document filed and ready. She left for the weekend. When she came back on Monday morning, several critical documents were missing from the file, not misplaced, missing. The purchase agreement, the environmental assessment, the zoning variance application, all gone. Without them, the deal couldn't close on schedule, and the delay would cost Vincent hundreds of thousands of dollars in financing fees and potentially allow a competing buyer to swoop in. Elaine tore through her office, checking every folder, every drawer, every shelf. She checked the shared filing room, the printer, even the trash cans. Nothing. The documents were simply gone. She went to Vincent and told him, and she watched his face darken, not with anger exactly, but with something colder and more dangerous. Vincent Moretti was a man who understood the difference between a mistake and a betrayal, and he could read the situation clearly enough to know that documents did not simply vanish from a locked office. "Who has access to your files?" he asked. Elaine listed the names. Herself, Tony, who served as building security, and Dominic, who had a key to every office in the building because he had insisted on it months ago, claiming he needed access for family business. Vincent said nothing for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. The documents were found 3 hours later. They were in Dominic's office, buried under a stack of unrelated papers in a drawer. When confronted, Dominic laughed, that sharp, performative laugh of his, and said it must have been a mix-up, that he must have grabbed the wrong files by accident, that it was no big deal. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply looked at his nephew with an expression that Elaine had never seen before, a look that was as cold and final as a locked door, and said, Do not ever touch her files again. Dominic's smile disappeared. For the first time, Elaine saw something behind it. A flash of something toxic and resentful, something that had been festering for a long time. He looked at Elaine, and in that brief, unguarded moment she saw it clearly. He did not just dislike her, he considered her a threat. She was close to Vincent, closer than Dominic was comfortable with, and her presence disrupted a hierarchy that Dominic had spent years carefully positioning himself within. After that day, Dominic stopped making snide comments. He stopped leaving unmarked documents on her desk. He stopped walking past her office without a glance. Instead, he became something worse. Polite. Excessively, elaborately polite. He greeted her every morning with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He complimented her work, her clothes, her hair. He brought her coffee without being asked. It was the politeness of a man who was planning something. Elaine was not fooled. She had learned to read people out of necessity. When you were invisible, you had a lot of time to watch, to observe, to catalogue the distance between what people said and what they meant. And she could see, as clearly as the plaque on her office door, that Dominic Ferrara was dangerous. She thought about telling Vincent, but what would she say? That his nephew was being too nice to her, that she had a bad feeling. Vincent was a man who dealt in facts, not feelings, and Elaine had nothing concrete, no evidence, no proof, just a tightness in her chest that she could not explain. So she did what she had always done. She watched, she waited, and she kept her guard up. Right now, I want to ask you something. If you have ever been underestimated, if someone has ever looked at you and decided you were not worth their time, type in the comments, "I know what it is like to be invisible." Because this community is built on people who have been through it, who have survived it, who have risen above it. And your voice matters here. The call came at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Elaine was in her apartment in Carroll Gardens, sitting on her couch with a cup of chamomile tea and a textbook on real estate, finance. She had enrolled in a continuing education program at Brooklyn College, the first step toward finishing her degree, the first step toward the NYU program that Vincent had mentioned. She was reading about capitalization rates and net operating income, and for the first time in her life she was studying not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because the material fascinated her, and because she could see, with increasing clarity, a future for herself that she had never dared to imagine. Her phone rang and the name on the screen said Tony. "Elaine," Tony's voice was low, tight, urgent. "You need to come to the building, now." "What happened?" "I cannot explain on the phone. Just come, use the back entrance." She was there in 12 minutes. The streets of Red Hook were empty, and the building was dark except for a light on the 3rd floor. A floor she had never been to, a floor that was always locked, always off limits. Tony met her at the back door, and his face told her everything she needed to know before he said a word. "Vincent has been arrested," he said. The word hit her like a physical blow. "Arrested? For what?" "They are calling it financial fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. The feds came to his house 2 hours ago. They had a warrant. They took him, they took his computers, they took boxes of documents." Tony paused, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. This was a man who stood 6'4" and weighed 260 pounds, a man who could snap a baseball bat in half with his bare hands, and he was afraid. "There is more," Tony said. "They have a witness, an inside informant, someone who has been feeding information to the federal prosecutors for months." Elaine felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Who?" she asked, though some part of her already knew the answer. "Dominic." The betrayal was almost elegant in its execution. Dominic Ferrara had been cooperating with federal investigators for the better part of a year, providing them with documents, recordings, and testimony in exchange for immunity from prosecution. He had given them everything, not just the legitimate businesses, but the other side of the family's operations, the side that Elaine had never been privy to, the side that Vincent had worked so hard to keep separate from her. But in the process of building their case, the prosecutors had also subpoenaed records from Vincent's legitimate holdings, the real estate, deals, the import company, the restaurant supply chain. And that meant they had Elaine's files, her correspondence, her meeting notes, her name, attached to transactions that she had always believed were clean, but that the prosecutors were now framing as part of a larger pattern of financial manipulation. Elaine stood in the darkened building, surrounded by men she barely knew, and felt the walls closing in. She was not a criminal. She had never done anything wrong. But she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who had learned to see the worst in every situation, that it did not matter. She was connected to Vincent Moretti. Her name was on his documents, and in the eyes of the law, proximity to power was often indistinguishable from complicity. "I need to see a lawyer," she said. Tony nodded. Vincent anticipated this. He set aside funds for anyone who might be pulled into this. "There is an attorney, Elena Vasquez. She is one of the best defense lawyers in the city. She is expecting your call." Elaine called Elena Vasquez at midnight, and by 2 in the morning she was sitting in the lawyer's midtown office, going through everything she knew. Elena was a small woman with sharp features and a rapid-fire speaking style that suggested she had never wasted a second of her life. She listened to Elaine's account with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray, asking precise questions, taking notes, and nodding in a way that was neither reassuring nor alarming, simply professional. "Here is the situation," Elena said when Elaine had finished. "You are not a target, not yet. But you are a person of interest, which means the prosecutors may want to talk to you, and they may try to pressure you into cooperating, just as they did with Dominic. They will offer you immunity. They will tell you that Vincent used you, that he put you in this position, that the best thing you can do for yourself is to tell them everything you know." "But I do not know anything," Elaine said. "Everything I worked on was legitimate." "I believe you," Elena said, "and the evidence supports that. Your files are clean. Your communications are straightforward. There is nothing in your work product that suggests you were aware of or involved in any illegal activity. But the prosecutors may not see it that way, or they may not want to see it that way, because you are close to Vincent, and your testimony could be valuable." "What should I do?" Elena looked at her for a long moment. "You have 2 options. Option 1, cooperate with the prosecutors. Tell them everything you know, which, based on what you have told me, is very little. They may lose interest in you, they may not. The risk is that they twist your words, take things out of context, use you to build a case that you did not intend to support." "And option 2? "Option 2, exercise your right to remain silent. Do not talk to them. Do not answer their questions. Let me handle all communication. This protects you legally, but it also means the prosecutors may view you with suspicion. They may assume you are hiding something." Elaine thought about it. She thought about Vincent's 3rd condition, the one about honesty. She thought about who she was and who she had always been, and she made her decision. "I will tell the truth," she said. "All of it, everything I know. I have nothing to hide." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I thought you would say that." "All right. We will do this on our terms. I will set up a meeting with the prosecutors. I will be present at all times, and you will answer their questions truthfully and completely, but only what they ask. Do not volunteer information. Do not speculate. Do not guess. Just the facts." The meeting with the federal prosecutors took place a week later, in a conference room at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Lower Manhattan. There were 4 people on the other side of the table, 2 prosecutors, an FBI agent, and a forensic accountant, and they spent 3 hours asking Elaine questions about her work for Vincent Moretti. She told them everything. She told them about finding the wallet, about Vincent's offer, about the job, about the files she managed, about the deals she coordinated. She told them about Dominic and the missing documents. She told them about her own background, the cleaning job, the tiny room, the condition that had kept her body and her life in a state of perpetual crisis. She was honest, completely, unflinchingly honest, and the prosecutors saw it. She could tell by the way their questions shifted, from pointed and accusatory to curious and almost sympathetic. They had been expecting a co-conspirator, or at least a reluctant accomplice. What they found was a woman who had been given a chance by a complicated man, who had done her job with integrity and who had nothing to hide. At the end of the meeting, the lead prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Walsh, who had the posture of a career military officer and the handshake of a union worker, looked at Elaine and said, "Miss Mercer, we have no reason to believe you were involved in any illegal activity. We may call you as a witness at trial, but you are not a target of this investigation. You are free to go." Elaine walked out of the U.S. Attorney's office into the bright midday sun, and she stood on the sidewalk and breathed. Just breathed. For the first time in a week, the knot in her chest loosened, and she felt something that she had not felt in so long that she almost did not recognize it. Relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief. But the relief did not last, because the arrest of Vincent Moretti sent shockwaves through his entire operation, and the aftershocks reached Elaine in ways she had not anticipated. The legitimate businesses were thrown into chaos. Partners pulled out of deals. Suppliers demanded immediate payment. Tenants in Vincent's buildings received notices from lawyers they had never heard of, and some of them panicked and broke their leases. The restaurant Vecchio's closed its doors for 3 weeks, while the health department conducted an inspection that everyone understood was not really about health. And Elaine, who had been Vincent's right hand in managing all of this, found herself in the impossible position of trying to hold together an empire while its king was behind bars. She did not have to do it. She could have walked away. No one would have blamed her. Not Elena, not Tony, not even Vincent himself, who sent word through his lawyer that Elaine should do what is best for herself, and that he would understand if she chose to leave. But Elaine did not leave. She could not. Not because she owed Vincent, though she did, but because the businesses employed people. Real people with families and rent payments and children in school. The restaurants had waitstaff and cooks who depended on their weekly paychecks. The import company had warehouse workers who could not afford to be unemployed. The real estate portfolio had tenants who needed someone to fix their leaking pipes and broken heaters. Elaine stayed because leaving would have meant abandoning people who were even more vulnerable than she was. And she knew what it felt like to be abandoned. She worked 18-hour days. She learned things she had never needed to know: how to negotiate with banks, how to file commercial insurance claims, how to handle a property tax dispute, how to talk to reporters who called every day looking for a comment on the Moretti case. She made mistakes. She lost a deal because she misread a contract. She was hung up on by a supplier who told her he did not do business with Moretti's girl. She cried in her office at least twice, behind a closed door with her face in her hands. But she did not quit. And slowly, painfully, the businesses stabilized, not thrived. There was no thriving in the shadow of a federal indictment, but stabilized. The restaurants reopened. The suppliers were paid. The tenants' pipes were fixed. The import company found new shipping routes that did not depend on the contacts that had been frozen by the investigation. And through it all, Elaine Mercer grew. She grew in competence, in confidence, in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was capable of far more than she, or anyone else, had ever believed. The woman who had been invisible, who had been nothing, who had been a shadow and a whisper and a pair of bony hands holding a mop, that woman was gone. In her place was someone who could walk into a room full of lawyers and bankers and look them in the eye and say, "Here is what we are going to do." Vincent Moretti's trial began in September, 7 months after his arrest, in a federal courtroom in downtown Manhattan. The case was front-page news, a dramatic, sprawling prosecution that promised to peel back the layers of one of Brooklyn's most storied families and expose the machinery of a shadow operation that had run for decades. Elaine attended every day of the trial. She sat in the back row of the courtroom, wearing the same simple black blouse she had worn on her first day of work, and she watched as the prosecution laid out its case. It was damning. Dominic Ferrara took the stand and testified against his own uncle with a smoothness that made Elaine's skin crawl. He was articulate, detailed, and utterly without remorse. He described financial structures, transaction patterns, and conversations with a precision that suggested he had been preparing for this moment for a long time, not because the law had cornered him, but because he had been positioning himself to take over what was left of the family's operations once Vincent was out of the picture. The defense fought hard. Vincent's legal team, a squad of expensive, brilliant attorneys, challenged every piece of evidence, attacked Dominic's credibility, and argued that the legitimate businesses had been run exactly as they appeared. Legitimately. They pointed out that the prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of a single informant, Dominic himself, whose motives were suspect and whose own hands were far from clean. But the momentum was against them. The jury was attentive, the evidence was voluminous, and the narrative the prosecution had constructed of a powerful man who had used a network of businesses to obscure the true nature of his wealth was compelling, even if not all of it was true. Elaine was called to testify on the 14th day of the trial. She walked to the witness stand with her back straight and her hands steady, and she looked at the jury, and she told the truth. She told them about finding the wallet, about the job offer, about her work managing the legitimate side of Vincent's business. She told them about Dominic's hostility, about the missing documents, about the night of the arrest. She told them about the months she had spent holding the businesses together, about the people whose livelihoods depended on them, about the decisions she had made and the ones she had struggled with. She was on the stand for 4 hours. The prosecutors tried to shake her. They asked leading questions, contradicted her timeline, suggested that she must have known more than she claimed. But Elaine was unshakable, not because she was rehearsed or coached, but because she was telling the truth, and the truth does not bend under pressure the way lies do. At one point, the lead, prosecutor Catherine Walsh, asked her a question that cut to the heart of everything. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "did you ever suspect that Mr. Moretti's businesses might be involved in illegal activity?" Elaine paused. She thought about the question carefully, the way Elena had taught her, and then she said, "I suspected that Mr. Moretti's life was more complicated than what I saw in my office. I am not naive. I grew up in Brooklyn. I know what the Moretti name means to some people. But I also know what I saw with my own eyes, which was a man who gave me a legitimate job, who treated me with respect and who never once asked me to do anything dishonest. Every document I handled, every transaction I processed, every meeting I attended, all of it was above board. That is not a suspicion, that is a fact." The courtroom was quiet after she said that, and when Elaine looked at Vincent, sitting at the defense table in his dark suit, she saw something she had never seen on his face before. Pride, not the arrogant, possessive pride of a man who was pleased with his property, but the quiet, aching pride of a man who had bet on another person's character and been proven right. The trial lasted 6 weeks. In the end, the jury convicted Vincent Moretti on 3 of the 12 charges, the financial ones, which carried significant penalties but were far less severe than the full indictment the prosecution had sought. The more serious charges were dismissed, largely because Dominic's testimony was contradicted by physical evidence and because several of the financial transactions the prosecution had flagged turned out to be, just as Elaine had testified, completely legitimate. Vincent was sentenced to 4 years in a federal minimum security facility. It was not nothing. 4 years was 4 years, and the loss of freedom was a punishment no matter how comfortable the facility. But it was a fraction of what the prosecution had wanted, and it preserved the possibility that Vincent would emerge on the other side with his legitimate businesses intact. Before he was taken into custody, Vincent was allowed a few moments with his family and associates in the courtroom. He spoke briefly with his lawyers, embraced his sister, who could not look at her own son, Dominic, seated across the room, and then turned to Elaine. He took her hands in his. They were warm and rough and strong, and Elaine could feel the calluses on his palms, the hands of a man who had built things for better and for worse. "You kept your promise," he said. "You kept yours," she replied. He smiled, that small, rare smile, and then he was gone, escorted through a side door by 2 federal marshals, and the courtroom emptied, and Elaine stood there alone in the back row, feeling the weight of everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. Because the story was not over, not even close. In the weeks following the sentencing, the landscape shifted dramatically. Dominic Ferrara, who had expected to step into his uncle's role and claim leadership of the family's remaining operations, found himself shut out entirely. His betrayal had made him untouchable, not just within the Moretti family, but in the broader network of associates and allies who had once respected the Moretti name. Nobody wanted to do business with a man who had turned on his own blood. Nobody trusted him. Nobody returned his calls. He spiraled. Without the family's resources and connections, Dominic's own financial position deteriorated rapidly. The immunity deal he had struck with the prosecutors protected him from criminal charges, but it did not protect him from the consequences of his own greed and miscalculation. Within 6 months he had lost his apartment, his car, and most of his so-called friends. The man who had once swaggered through the Red Hook building in $1,500 suits was now living in a studio in Bayonne, New Jersey, working as a consultant for a company that did not know or did not care about his past. And Elaine kept working. With Vincent's blessing, communicated through his lawyers, she took on an expanded role in managing the legitimate businesses. She was not the boss, she did not pretend to be. But she was the one who showed up every day, who made the decisions that needed to be made, who kept the lights on, and the employees paid, and the deals moving forward. And because she had testified honestly and been cleared by the federal investigation, her reputation was not tainted by the trial. If anything, it was enhanced. She was known as the woman who had told the truth under oath, who had stood up in a federal courtroom and said exactly what she knew and nothing more, and who had been believed. That reputation opened doors. Other business owners in Brooklyn began reaching out to her, not because of her connection to Vincent, but because of what she had demonstrated during the crisis. Real estate developers wanted her advice. Restaurant owners wanted her management skills. A non-profit organization that provided housing assistance in the borough asked her to join its board. A professor at Brooklyn College, who had read about her testimony in the newspaper, invited her to speak to his business ethics class. Elaine said yes to all of it, not because she wanted fame or recognition, but because she had discovered something about herself that she could not put back in the box. She had a voice, and it was worth hearing. She finished her degree at Brooklyn College in the spring, graduating with honors in business administration. She stood on the stage at the Barclays Center in a cap and gown, looking out at an audience of thousands, and she thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, the one in the oversized coat, with the cracked phone and the packet of crackers and the room above the laundromat. And she felt a distance between then and now that was not measured in time, but in identity. She was not the same person. She was not invisible anymore. 2 years after his sentencing, Vincent Moretti was released from federal custody. He had served his time quietly, without incident, in a facility in Pennsylvania, and he returned to Brooklyn on a cold December morning, looking older and thinner and somehow smaller than Elaine remembered, but with those same sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing. She picked him up herself, driving the car that the business now provided her, a modest sedan that she kept immaculately clean, and she took him not to the Red Hook building, which had been sold during his incarceration to pay legal fees, but to Vecchio's, the restaurant on Court Street, where she had found his wallet nearly 3 years ago. The restaurant had been renovated. Elaine had overseen the work herself, and it was beautiful. The same dark green awning and gold lettering outside, but inside, a warm, modern space with exposed brick and soft lighting, and tables made from reclaimed wood. It was full even at 11 in the morning, because the neighborhood had come back to Vecchio's the moment it reopened, drawn not just by the food, but by the story of the place and the people behind it. Vincent stood in the doorway and looked at what Elaine had done, and for the first time in her life, she saw tears in his eyes. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she said. "I just held on to what you built." They sat at a table in the corner, the same corner where they had first talked, where Elaine had eaten that biscotti and tried not to cry, and they caught up. Vincent listened as Elaine told him about the businesses, the degree, the board seat, the speaking engagements, the NYU program that she had been accepted into for the following fall. He listened the way he always had, fully, patiently, with a stillness that made her feel like the only person in the world. And then he told her something she had not expected. "I am stepping back," he said, "from all of it. The businesses, the family, the whole life. I am 67 years old, Elaine. I have spent 4 decades building things and watching them get torn down, and I am tired. I want to live simply. I want to read books and cook dinner and maybe, if I can convince her, reconcile with my sister." He paused. "But I do not want what I built to die. The legitimate side, the real estate, the restaurants, the import company, those are real businesses that employ real people. They matter, and I want someone I trust to run them." He looked at Elaine. "No," she said before he could finish the thought. "Hear me out. Vincent, I am a former cleaning lady. I have a bachelor's degree that I finished 8 months ago. I weigh 112 pounds. I am not—" "You are exactly the person," he said, and his voice had that quality again, that low, certain warmth that had made her step through his door on a cold morning 3 years ago. "You have been running these businesses for 2 years already. You have done it better than I did, because you do not carry the baggage I carry. You are not weighed down by history or reputation or expectation. You are free in a way that I have never been, and that freedom is what these businesses need." "I am afraid," she admitted. "Good," he said. "Fear means you are taking it seriously. The people who are not afraid are the ones who destroy things." Elaine looked at him across the table. This man who had changed her life, who had seen her when no one else did, who had bet on her honesty and been rewarded with loyalty and competence and a kind of fierce, stubborn love that neither of them had ever named, but that both of them felt. "Okay," she said. And that was how Elaine Mercer, the woman who had been invisible, the woman who had weighed 91 pounds and cleaned offices for $11 an hour, the woman who had found a wallet with $3,000 and brought it back because it was the right thing to do, became the president of the Moretti Holdings Group. She changed the name, not because she was ashamed of Vincent, but because the business had changed, and she wanted the name to reflect that. She called it Mercer Enterprises. Vincent laughed when she told him. "It has a nice ring to it," he said. The first year was hard. There were skeptics, people who doubted that a woman with her background could run a multi-million-dollar operation, people who whispered that she was just a front, that Vincent was still pulling the strings from behind the scenes. There were challenges she had not anticipated, supply chain issues, a downturn in the commercial real estate market, a key employee who quit to start a competing business. There were nights when she sat alone in her office, a proper office now in a proper building in Brooklyn Heights, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But she had learned something during her years in the wilderness, during those long, cold, lonely years of invisibility. She had learned that surviving was not about being strong. It was about being stubborn. It was about getting up every morning, even when your body ached and your stomach churned and the world told you that you were nothing, and doing the next thing that needed to be done. Not the big, dramatic, heroic thing, just the next thing, and then the next, and then the next. And that stubbornness, that dogged, relentless refusal to quit, turned out to be exactly what a business needed in its leader. Mercer Enterprises grew, slowly at first, and then with a momentum that surprised even Elaine. She expanded the real estate portfolio, focusing on affordable housing and community-oriented commercial spaces in neighborhoods that the big developers had overlooked, the same neighborhoods where she had once mopped floors and emptied trash cans. She turned Vecchio's into a small chain, 3 locations in Brooklyn, each one staffed by people from the local community, each one serving as a gathering place for the neighborhood. She partnered with local organizations to create job training programs because she knew what it was like to be stuck in a dead-end job with no way out, and she wanted to build the ladders that no one had built for her. She also started a foundation, the Moretti Mercer Foundation, which provided medical care, housing assistance, and educational scholarships to people in Brooklyn who were struggling the way she had struggled. Vincent contributed the initial funding, and Elaine raised the rest through a combination of corporate donations, fundraising events, and the sheer force of her personality, which had become, over the years, a formidable thing. Because here is what nobody expected about Elaine Mercer. She was magnetic. Not in the flashy look-at-me way of a reality television star or a social media influencer. She was magnetic in the way that a person who has been through genuine hardship and emerged with their integrity intact is always magnetic. People wanted to be around her. They wanted to hear her speak, to ask her advice, to feel the quiet certainty that radiated from her like warmth from a fire. She had a way of looking at people, really looking at them, the way Vincent had looked at her that first day in Red Hook, that made them feel seen. And in a city of 8 million people, where almost everyone was invisible to almost everyone else, being seen was the most valuable gift a person could receive. She spoke at conferences, at universities, at community centers. She told her story, all of it, unvarnished and unembellished, and people listened. They listened because it was true, and because the truth has a weight and a resonance that no amount of polish or spin can replicate. I was invisible, she would say. For 29 years, I was a ghost. I cleaned your offices and you never knew my name. I rode your buses and you looked right through me. I walked your streets and the wind went through me like I was not even there. And I want you to know that there are people like me all around you, right now, in this city, in your neighborhoods, in your buildings, people who are struggling with things you cannot see, people whose bodies are failing them or whose lives have fallen apart, or who have simply been forgotten. And what I want to ask you, what I need to ask you, is this: see them. Just see them. You do not have to fix them. You do not have to save them. You just have to see them. Because sometimes that is all it takes. Sometimes being seen is the beginning of everything. 3 years after she became president of Mercer Enterprises, the company was valued at $42 million. Elaine herself was profiled in the New York Times in a piece titled "The Woman Who Came Back from Invisible." The article described her journey, from the room above the laundromat to the corner office in Brooklyn Heights, and it included a photograph that Elaine had asked the photographer to take from a specific angle, looking out the window of her office toward Flatbush Avenue, toward the building where she had once lived, toward the street where she had once walked in the cold and the dark, unseen. She kept the article framed on her office wall, not because she was proud of the coverage, but because she wanted to remember. She never wanted to forget where she had come from, because forgetting would mean losing the thing that had gotten her here, the thing that Vincent Moretti had recognized in her from the very first moment, when she stood on his doorstep in Red Hook, with his wallet in her hand and nothing in her pockets. Her honesty, her decency, her stubborn, ferocious refusal to let the world turn her into something she was not. Vincent visited her office once a month, always on a Friday, always at noon, always carrying a bag of biscotti from Vecchio's. He was living quietly now, in a small apartment in Bay Ridge, reading history, books and growing tomatoes on his fire escape and slowly, painfully rebuilding his relationship with his sister. He was softer than he had been. The sharpness in his eyes had mellowed into something warmer, gentler, as if prison had sanded down the last of his edges, but he still had that quality, that presence, that way of filling a room simply by being in it. They would sit in Elaine's office and eat biscotti and talk about the businesses, about the foundation, about the neighborhood, about life. Sometimes they talked about the trial, about Dominic, about the choices that had been made and the ones that could not be unmade. Sometimes they talked about Vincent's mother, the tiny woman from Sicily who had given her food to her children and sewn buttons for 12 hours a day, and died without ever knowing that her sacrifice had planted a seed that would grow into something extraordinary. And sometimes they did not talk at all. They just sat there, in the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other completely, and watched the city through the window. The people rushing by on the street below, each one carrying a story, each one visible or invisible depending on who was looking, each one just one moment, one decision, one act of unexpected kindness away from a life they could not yet imagine. On one of those Friday visits, Vincent asked Elaine a question he had never asked before. "Are you happy?" Elaine thought about it. She thought about it the way she thought about everything, carefully, honestly, with full attention. "I am not the word I would use," she said. "Happy sounds like something that happens to you, like weather. What I am is present. I am here. I am real. For the first time in my life, I take up space in the world, And I am not apologizing for it. I am not hiding. I am not hoping that someone will notice me. I am just here, doing what I can, being who I am, and that is more than enough." Vincent nodded. "That is more than most people ever get," he said. "I know," Elaine said, "I know. She was invisible until the Mafia boss changed her life. The very skinny woman now opens doors once closed, and she does not open them just for herself. She opens them for everyone, for the cleaners who come in before dawn, for the mothers who skip meals so their children can eat, for the people who ride the bus standing up because they have learned that sitting down means being touched by someone else's discomfort, for the invisible ones, the forgotten ones, the ones the city walks past without a glance. She opens the doors, and she holds them open, and she stands in the doorway and says, 'Come in. There is room for you here. I see you.'" On the wall of Elaine Mercer's office, next to the framed New York Times article, there is a small plaque. It is not gold or silver or engraved with anything fancy. It is just a simple piece of wood with simple words burned into it, words that Vincent Moretti said to her on a cold morning in Red Hook, words that changed her life, words that she now lives by every single day. A person's worth is not determined by their bank account or their waistline or the neighborhood they live in. It is determined by who they are when no one is watching. Elaine reads those words every morning when she arrives at work and every evening before she leaves, and every time she reads them, she thinks about the woman she was, the ghost of Flatbush Avenue, the shadow, the whisper, and she thinks about the woman she is now, and she marvels at the distance between them. Not because she thinks she is special, not because she thinks her story is unique, but because she knows deep in her bones that there are millions of people out there who are standing right where she once stood, on the sidewalk in the cold holding someone else's wallet, wondering if the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. And to those people, she has only one message, the same message she gives. At every speech, at every conference, at every community center and classroom and boardroom, do the right thing, even when it costs you, even when no one is watching, even when the world tells you that you are too small, too thin, too poor, too broken to matter. Do the right thing because that is who you are, and who you are is the only thing that no one can take from you. If you watched until the very end, then this story touched something inside you. Leave a comment right now saying, "I watched until the end," so I can get to know you and see who truly loves the stories on this channel. And while you are here, hit that like button, because when you like this video, you help it reach someone out there who needs to hear it today, someone who is invisible and waiting for their moment. Share it with someone who needs to believe that things can change. And if you are not yet subscribed, now is the time. Because this channel tells stories about ordinary people who overcome extraordinary odds, and the next one might be the story that changes your perspective forever. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will see you in the next one.